All right, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I see we have a number of folks in the waiting room. Thank you for joining us. My name is Josh Palmer. I'm the head of content for Onboard. We're happy to have you here for today's presentation on navigating governance in modern times. We'll be joining our speakers here shortly. We're just going to give people who are joining us a few minutes to assemble. But if you are here for the webinar, Leadership in the Boardroom, you are in the correct space, correct place at the correct time. And we'll get here started in just a few. All right, looks like we have a quorum, if you will. So a quick few bits of introduction. Again, my name is Josh Palmer. I'm here on behalf of Onboard. If you're not familiar with Onboard, we are a board management software platform. Our primary goal is to make digital experiences that make board meetings simple, secure, and effective. Just a quick note about who we are and who we serve. So we're primarily a board management software solution. We serve more than 6,000 board-led organizations, everything from not-for-profit to banking to finance to academic institutions, healthcare, and the like. We serve these 6,000 board-led organizations and help support more than 150,000 meetings per year and have 150,000 users. We're in 60 plus countries, including United Kingdom, England, Ireland, North America. This is just a little bit of a chestnut, a mission statement from our co-founder, current board chair, Parun Chadha, who started the company back in 2003. He says there's typically three types of board meetings. So there's the one you prepared for, the one that actually you had, and then the board meeting you wish you had. And it's our endeavor to always make sure you have that third type of board meeting. A couple of housekeeping notes. This is a Zoom webinar. So on that platform, all guests are mute by default. However, we highly encourage your participation. If you do have questions, comments, feedback on the content of the show, or if you have questions about a particular topic, please do send your comments via the chat and or Q&A features. I'll be in the background monitoring both of those as the discussion unfolds, so you'll have somebody ready at the response there. We also have a couple of interactive polls just to gauge the audience level of engagement with some of the topics we're talking about. And then this is one of the most frequently asked questions. Yes, we will send you the slide deck and a link to the on-demand video of this session to the email that you registered with. So just some quick housekeeping notes there. And then one more additional housekeeping note. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. British time, a little bit late in the evening, but we think it's a really important topic, governance with AI. So AI-enabled boardrooms, what are the pitfalls? What are the practical applications of AI in the boardroom? I'm going to be very happy to host that session with our CEO, Mark Huffman, as well as our Chief Technology Officer, Robin Fleming. So I hope you can join us for that. That would be great to see you there tomorrow as well. A quick note about our agenda today as we get ready to introduce our speakers. Number one, we're going to be talking about purpose and being clear about accountability in the boardroom. Governing risk and innovation. AI is a really great use case or a practical example of how that happens in the boardroom and how we're seeing that unfold in governance practices today. And then we'll wrap up with ESG and how credible are you or your organization or your board. So I'm very happy to join you here today. As I said, my name is Josh Palmer. I'm the head of content and research at Onboard. Thank you for joining us. I'm very happy to be able to introduce Mark Goiter. He's the founder of Tomorrow's Company, and he's a key contributor to the 2006 UK company law reform. He's also a leading advocate for purpose-led leadership, integrated thinking, and stewardship as the bridge between boards and long-term investors. Joining us also today is Michael Solomon. He's the founder of Responsible 100, which is a practical benchmarking tool for measuring responsible business across 22 impact areas. He brings a systems level view of how governance must evolve to meet today's social, environmental, and ethical imperatives. Michael, Mark, thank you for joining us today and welcome to the presentation. I'll let you all take it from here. Excuse me.
Thank you very much, Josh. I don't know about you, but I've certainly been observing that the swirling tides of interest in responsible business, in purpose-led business, and in diversity and so many other things, and ESG. And I've been warning for some time that I think ESG has become a lazy label. And there's a blog I've done which talks about that. Indeed, in 2003, Tomorrow's Company produced a piece of work called Redefining CSR, where we talked about two kinds of CSR, and you could say there's two kinds of ESG. There's the kind that's about compliance, and there's the kind that's about conviction. And it's sometimes, I think, people pursue these labels without any real conviction. I'm very conscious that in this audience today, those registered, about 2/3 seem to be people who are involved in businesses, and 1/3 seem to be people who are involved in statutory organizations, third sector organizations, and so on. And most of my remarks are about the accountability of businesses, and most of the principles are applicable. But from time to time, I apologize if, for those of you who are not involved in the governance of businesses, the remarks may seem slightly less immediately relevant. I talked about the ESG as a lazy label. I know a company called Unipart, which I've worked with for many decades, and I admire very much. And for some reason, they seem to feel the need. We're having talked about the Unipart way, which is a fantastic set of principles by which they run their business, and then go on to say this is an application of embedding environmental, social, and governance principles. And my critique is that why do you need to say that? The Unipart way stands for itself. It's about a way of doing business. Why do we have to decorate the cake with this ESG icing? And so this is what we want to do today, Michael and I. We want to get behind the words to the substance. And Michael will talk later about the very practical ways in which he and his organization do that. I want to give us a bit of a kind of cold shower of clarity about words like accountability and purpose, and make sure that we are actually getting behind the slogans to the reality. So the first thing I want to do is to examine the accountability and the authority of the board, and this is where we come to our first poll. I'd like you to give us your vote on this. And the second one, which really goes with it, the first one is about to whom are we accountable. The second one is to whom do we owe our duty? And I'd like you to think about both of those and what your answer is. So for those of you who sit on boards or work with the boards of businesses, your answer to these two questions are very important for the way you see shareholders. Many people, I'm very interested in that response, which I've just seen. Nobody says that they see their accountability as being to shareholders. Most people think the accountability is to both. Have we got answers to poll 2 yet?
Yeah, we just displayed the poll question for poll number 2 there, Mike.
Oh, right. So yeah, okay, thank you. So I'm interested in the response to these two before commenting in the both and answer to the first question. While I'm waiting for that, I might just mention that if you really want to date yourself, if you really are an old timer in corporate governance, you'll recognize the answer to this question, which I'm not polling. What is the difference between a non-executive director and a supermarket trolley? Answer, a supermarket trolley has a mind of its own, but you can get more food in a non-executive director. As I say, I'm not polling that question. Now, to the second, to whom do we owe our duty as directors? I see we have 31% for shareholders, 23% for stakeholders, 8% the regulator, and 38% the company. The people who, so if we come to the poll two, the people who said that we owe our duty to the company are legally right. If we go back to poll one, the people who said we are accountable to shareholders are in most forms of company law right. So it isn't true to say in accountability terms that you are accountable to shareholders and stakeholders unless you actually qualify it by saying, well, of course, there's formal accountability, there's legal accountability, but there's real accountability, and we, of course, are accountable to our stakeholders. So that leads me on to the question I wanted to pose in poll three before discussing your answers to all three. So can we just show poll three, please? And this is a question which it's harder if you're a third sector organization to answer, because it is very much posing the challenge about, are we doing what shareholders want? If you're a charity, it's always struck me as somebody who was the founder of a charity and was involved in its governance for 3 decades. Who are the shareholders in a charity? But that's another question. But poll three also introduces the question of timescale. And what we're seeing is we must do whatever is in the interests of and there's an absolutely common response that says we must do whatever is in the best interest of the company organization in the long term. Interesting. I think some would say, well, you've got to think about the short term and the long term, because as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. But nonetheless, neglecting the long term, of course, is pretty fatal, as so many corporate car crashes from Enron before and after tell us. So now we have the answers to those 3 questions. And what I want to discuss with you is what that implies for the role of shareholders. Because too many boards, it strikes me, see their role in companies, especially listed companies and private equity-owned companies, as if our only job is to please our shareholders. But that, of course, neglects the point that it is to the company itself that we owe our duty. And I think it's a really crucial distinction for everybody involved in corporate governance and in the activities of boards to keep clear in your minds that we owe our duty to the organization, and we will do the best job for its shareholders and its stakeholders if and only if we fulfill our duty to the organization well, balancing the short term and the long term. And that's very much what Tomorrow's Company has always talked about in terms of stewardship. I've had many debates about this. I've had arguments with even with the regulator, the Financial Reporting Council, who I once found saying in a meeting, oh, of course, the UK's Companies Act of 2006 embodies shareholder primacy. And my answer to that is no, it doesn't. And I was eventually provoked to produce the slide, which I'm going to ask Josh to display now, which distinguishes between 3 views of the company. The shareholder primacy view of the company very much puts today's shareholders first, and it puts the share price and shareholder value in the forefront. And it tends to put quarterly reporting, quarterly analysis, quarterly measurement. And it tends to treat the company as the property of the shareholders. And if you look at the city pages of our newspapers, that's what you'll find. Stakeholder theory, on the other hand, and proponents of stakeholder capitalism tend to go to the other extreme They tend, and indeed, you could say that the answers to our poll one, shareholders and stakeholders, suggested we've got a lot of stakeholder capitalists in the audience here today. And they tend to talk about a triple bottom line where we're measuring companies for their impact on people, profit, and planet. They tend to think about time horizon as being short, medium, and long. And they do look beyond the company. They don't being the property of shareholders as something broader. In my view, the company law that we have in the UK, and indeed the attitude which I believe is the true balance between the role of stakeholders and shareholders, is what the Companies Act designers called enlightened shareholder value, which says that yes, the directors owe their duty to the company. They are thinking about the company tomorrow in its success and not just today, and that's how you deliver value to the shareholders to whom you are accountable. So I hope those concepts help in getting one thinking about the role of the board. And when conversations are being deflected by what is the city going to say about something, I hope that it's clear to company secretaries, to chairs, to corporate councils, that they need to balance the discussion by reinforcing those elements. And there's a very important point here, because if in fact the company does best when there is that alignment around the long-term interests of shareholders, doesn't it make sense for the company to be going out and seeking to get shareholders who share its long-term vision? And has your board actually discussed whether we've got the right shareholders on the register? It's not an inevitability who the company has on the register if it's a listed company. The company can seek the shareholders who will be aligned with its purpose and values. And it's no coincidence. I was reading in the Financial Times this week about Bertelsmann, the famous family-owned publisher. And when you look at the literature on listed companies, it's no coincidence that listed companies which have a strong shareholding by families outperform listed companies which don't. Because, of course, you find that alignment and it makes life a lot simpler and strategy a lot easier to adhere to if, in fact, you have that alignment. And that brings us to something which I have argued, and Tomorrow's Company has argued for many years, is absolutely vital for an effective board. It's the idea of the board mandate. A board mandate is ultimately a document, but to get to the document, you're talking about a process. You're talking about asking ourselves, who's put us here? With what intentions and to what purpose? And then the questions that I was asking you, to whom are we formally accountable and to whom are we informally accountable? And have we made it clear, if we're in a company with dispersed shareholding, have we made it clear to shareholders who may have indirectly bought into our shares, this is the kind of company you've bought into? Is the company taking the initiative, for example, or is the company surrendering the initiative to shareholders? And in our experience, it is companies who've been through that process, when they're faced with crisis, they can refer to their mandate and they could say, look, we've made it clear in the past how we see our accountability, how we see our priorities, how we see risk, how we are going to deal with innovation. And that makes it a lot easier when their shareholders put them under pressure, whether they decide to resist their shareholder pressure or whether they decide to concede to that shareholder pressure. So in the next poll, I want to ask people, how many of you in your organization have something that you would recognize as a board mandate in place, something which describes that accountability and reflects a process of thought about what the boundaries of the authority of the board are. And if we can have a look and see how people have responded to that. And 70% of those of you are saying that yes, indeed, we have some form of board mandate. And I would commend the process to that 30% of you who said no, we don't. At this point, I want to move on. I want to move on to the questions of the we're asked in particular to think about the governance of AI. The questions about governance of AI really divide into two parts. There's first of all something which I believe you'll be talking about tomorrow if you join the session that Josh was talking about, which is the internal use of AI to make your governance processes, your board processes more effective. And the second part is the external governance of AI and the ways in which the board effectively governs the innovation, the risk, the opportunities that come with AI. And the questions that to me it poses that you might need to think about in terms of your board. First of all, I believe they're questions about philosophy. Do we see AI as master or servant? For example, on the internal use of AI, making us more efficient and effective in the way we do our board papers, the way we summarize our board discussions, I see a very real danger. If we're not careful, they become a way of making us more glib. We get the board minutes done more quickly. We get the board papers prepared more quickly. We get other factors defining the issues. But are we actually in the process thinking less hard about the difficult issues that those board papers cover? And in the same way with the external issues, there will be many techie enthusiasts who will be leaping into the fray to tell us all the clever things that AI can do. But this is, I would suggest to boards, a time to pause, a time to say, hang on, let's go back to that board mandate. Let's think about our purpose and our values. AI is a hugely useful tool, but how do we use the tool in a way that is consistent with our purpose and values? And how do we do justice to the things that make our business unique, as opposed to simply trying to be a me too and rushing after the latest fashion? I'm reminded of the guy who was standing on the balcony during the French Revolution, and he turned to somebody else and he said, "Look at all those crowds down in the street. Those are my people. I am their leader. I must go and follow them." It is important to make sure that the company is actually leading and not following in the way that it is deciding to take AI on board. And in recent dialogues we've had, Rolls-Royce was given to us as an example with its Alethea principles of a company which had really given that thought to AI and particularly to the safety principles, the risk principles around the use of AI. But it also raises questions about the board composition. Yes, you should have people who understand the technology, but do you also have people who can take a more detached view? I'm fascinated that two entrepreneurs who I very much respect, one a UK entrepreneur called Piers Linney, who I believe is a former Dragon's Den participant, and one the famous Jack Ma. Both of those have talked very eloquently about what we need from education if we're to understand AI. And they're saying it's not the technological understanding. We don't need more nerds, they're saying. What we need if we're to govern AI is people who've done the arts, people who've done the creative sciences, people who have actually the ability to imagine the uses of AI that will be distinctive and different and could make your company distinctive and different. So I would challenge you in the governance of AI to think about the composition of the board that you have to ensure that you're ready for the creative and design challenges and strategic challenges that go with AI. So at that point, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to suggest that it is time to come back to this cold shower of clarity that I was talking about when we consider ESG and we look at the words that we use in our ESG reports. And it's time to start seeing how we might assess ourselves to be the most effective and the most honest describers of how much progress we've made. And having worked with Michael Solomon and Responsible 100 for many years now, it gives me great pleasure to commend his wisdom to you and his experience to you, and to introduce Michael Solomon.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. I have shared the poll results with you via WhatsApp. You'll be glad to know I've posted in a couple of links that you wanted me to post as we went through. I think I've managed to do that as we discussed. I thought that it would be a good idea to say just a little bit about the work that we've done with the other badges and frameworks for responsible and sustainable business. Mark and I started working together properly about 4 years ago when we were involved in a conference called Anthropy. There's been 3 Anthropies. We may continue to be involved in Anthropy 4 and 5 and beyond if they continue to organize the event. One of the discussions that we took there was to say there are all these efforts and all these methods and ways of trying to be more responsible. Which are the most effective? Which are the ones that are fixing the way the world works? We've got some problems. There's been efforts to help businesses to be more sustainable and more responsible for many years, and tomorrow's company has very recently celebrated 30 years working in this space, really as a pioneer. But what Mark and I did was we invited the different badges and frameworks to consider that perhaps we weren't really succeeding. Perhaps we were all getting used to the idea of polycrisis. Sometimes people talk about metacrisis, and the fact that the problems in the world seem to be getting worse and more challenging and more difficult to fix, and were interrelated and interdependent in many cases, with sort of feedback loops that resulted in, grave warnings from environmental scientists and apparent, democratic breakdown in very many countries around the world, lurching to the right, populism, blaming the immigrant at a time when we know that we're going to see much more immigration between countries because of climate change. So we challenged the other marks and frameworks and said, are we succeeding? Are we managing to help businesses to be more responsible, transform themselves, transform economies? And if not, perhaps we should have a discussion about that and what that means for us. So I'm just going to take a moment to put the list of those organizations and a link to an article that refers to it. We invited B Corp, the Blueprint for a Better Business, Business Declares, Business in the Community, Cambridge Institute for Sustainable Leadership, Donut Economics, Action Lab, Future Fit Foundation, Good Business Charter, Institute of Business Ethics, Purpose-Driven Organizations Project, Planet Mark, and The Purposeful Company to discuss to what extent we were succeeding and to what extent we were failing, and whether we were able to grow up in a sense of owning some degree of a failure here, not getting businesses to be transformative, not building a better system, and to be grown up to have a conversation about to what extent we were part of that failure and what it might be that we need to do to make changes so that we can herald real transformation in business. So I'm going to put a little detail into the chat, then I'm going to move on with the rest of what I wanted to tell you. There is a link in Pioneer's post that describes this work, and I think it's titled Time That Responsible Business Grew Up, and there's the list of the organizations involved. So in that work, Responsible 100 is a partner with B Corp. Outside of this group, we seek to compete with B Corp. We are in our second incarnation. Our first incarnation ran from 2012 to 2018, and our second incarnation has been under development since 2020. And we're talking about being pretty much soft launch ready right now in this second incarnation. We believe we have a better way to test businesses in terms of their sustainability and their responsibility. Not really test them, but to exercise them, to think about all the different issues that impact them and they impact, and the social, environmental, and ethical, to understand where their opportunities are to improve their practices, to have a better impact. Where are the threats if they don't manage to avoid poor practice? What are the threats that they may encounter? So we have a fundamentally different way of working with businesses, and I'll say a little bit about that in a moment. And as a result of the way that we work, we allow businesses to make different claims about themselves, more realistic claims about themselves as a result of the steps that we go through. So as I said, this Responsible 100 started in 2012, but my start was in 2001, when I was working in financial publishing. And my bosses said, what we need to do is to create a new SRI media brand. SRI, Socially Responsible Investment, was the acronym we used before CSR. CSR has rather turned into ESG. But in 2001, it was SRI, and I was asked to create a SRI media brand. And it sounded a bit like a promotion, so I accepted it. But I asked for some time to research SRI, as I really was a novice, to see what ideas and suggestions that I could come up with to create a media brand, an offering for people that wanted to read about this, and also, of course, for advertisers that wanted to support the publications that we created. And so I got in touch with the big banks and the big oil companies that seem to be the most prolific producers of SRI reports, or glossy SRI brochures in many cases. And I was immediately struck by finding it very difficult to believe the content, struggling very much with this idea of these big businesses using imagery of the sapling in the sort of clasped hands, this sort of enduring image of sustainability, or of children in African villages in far-off places where these companies were making the world a better place. And within the pages, all these claims about positive impacts. And it struck me that it wasn't credible. It was really important information from really important businesses, but the problem was a lack of credibility. So after some research and some thinking, I went back to the bosses and I said, look, I propose that we don't create an SRI media brand, we create a credible SRI media brand, and we ensure the credibility of the information that we carry. And I think the way to do that is to require participants, businesses that want to claim to be sustainable, responsible, etc., to require them to be transparent and accountable across a wide range of social, environmental, and ethical issues. Let's not let them cherry pick about the things that they want to talk about and avoid the things that they don't want to talk about, and require them to say something about all of these different things that impact them one way or another. Businesses that are willing and able to tell the truth in that way, I suggest, can be much more credible and believable than the rest. So that's essentially the test that we have been experimenting with and have produced through Responsible 100 in 2 different ways. Transparency and accountability across a wide range of issues. It's not helpful or realistic to think that a business can be perfect. Any type of organization can be perfect. That's not realistic. Or trade-offs are what we do all day long, and compromise is inevitable. So we cannot perform well at all these different things. We can nonetheless be open and honest about that. We can nonetheless explain the trade-offs that we make and the decisions that we make. So we currently look at 22 different responsibility issues across 8 broad categories. We look at business design and governance, community, environment, ethical choices, human rights, marketplace ethics, technology, and workforce. And we work with a range of NGOs and campaign groups and academics and other experts to define benchmark on each of these issues that we look at, whether it's community impact, whether it's carbon footprint, whether it's effective governance, whether it's culture, cybersecurity, living wage, product and service information. These are some of the 22 issues that we look at. We say your business is either poor or okay or good or excellent. And the work we're going to do, the steps we're going to take you through is taking these issues one by one and working out where you perform on that scale. And then working out how and where you can improve your performance, and where it's most critical, most important, which issues you should prioritize, which issues you should work on first. And it's not usually the case that here we can get you from good to excellent, and on this issue we can get you from good to excellent. It's usually the critical work, the first work is, this is where you're poor and this is how you get from poor to okay. We'll go from okay to good to excellent afterwards. Let's not be poor on some of these important issues. That tends to be where we start our work with the businesses that we take through these steps. So I'm going to just share a link here so that you can get a sense of what this looks like. We have, of course, worked with Tomorrow's Company on our effective governance scorecard. And if you click on the link that I put into the chat, you should open up a modal, sort of pop-up. And towards the bottom of that, there is a blue button that says add your score and story. The evidence, the written evidence, you explaining your policies and practices or your positions, your current plans, your future plans, the things that you did before that worked and the things that you did before that didn't work, etc. Part of your story. That's the word that we use. And if you've clicked that score button, you'll see we present unscored, and then on the left there are buttons excellent, good, okay, poor. And if you click on those, you'll see we are loosely defining poor, okay, good, and excellent for effective governance. And for each of those loose definitions, we say, if this is where you think you perform, this is how you think you currently perform on this issue, here are some of the things that we think your story should include. So you're very welcome to use this. Nothing gets shared or published, certainly not without your express permission, several steps through a process and through a relationship. But everybody on the call is welcome to have a go. It'd be simple to provide information and make yourself identifiable. If you want to provide information here and say, please don't assign this information to my business. I'd like to suggest this is an element of how our current performance on this issue, but that's just between you and me, Michael, and you and me and Tomorrow's Company. That's fine. But that's essentially how we work. We help you navigate all these different issues, work out which of these 22 are going to be the most important, where the greatest opportunity exists to improve, and then we'll help you work out how to make those improvements. And so all that knowledge and experience that Marcus has on effective governance is written into these definitions and these disclosure prompts. And getting into that discussion with you and teasing out all the information with you is how we like to work. There are two other things that I would like to provide into the chat here. One of them is a look at all the 22 issues that we explore as part of a short survey that helps you prioritize and say, well, cybersecurity is important or critical. The rights of Indigenous people is not. That is a very, very simple and quick survey form that we have. And the last thing that I'll share is the modal for responsible technology, because responsible technology is where our understanding of AI and the impacts of AI exist. Responsible technology is quite a sprawling issue, and it incorporates personal data and elements of cybersecurity, and the impact of the technology is essentially, are you going to have a positive impact on the world with this technology? We've seen the giant technology companies create these increasingly addictive apps where an increasing number of hours of young people, impressionable people are spent using these apps, and responsible technologists would say they should never have been built in the first place. So that's a really important issue. As I said, that's where our exposure. This is where we can help you test your exposure to AI and whether you're working in a responsible way or not. So I'm just going to share those with you quickly, and then I'm going to invite Mark to take us into some Q&A, perhaps.
Well, I certainly don't want to preempt Josh's role in taking us into Q&A. I would just mention one thing, Josh, before I hand back to you, and that's just just to say that everything that I've been talking about, and indeed we've been talking about, is emphasizing that in our view, in a word, governance is about stewardship. Stewardship means that you inherit something and you pass it on in better condition, whether the something is a set of assets, or it's a set of values, or if it's a set of relationships. And if you're interested, one more link to add, together with a Singaporean co-author, I had the privilege of writing a book called Entrusted: Stewardship for Responsible Capitalism, which talks very much about the principles and the application of stewardship across East and West. And it's fascinating to see how much commonality actually there is across East and West when you go beneath the surface to the deep principles of stewardship and governance. So with that, I'll hand back to you, Josh, for questions and onward insights.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mark and Michael, for your thoughts, and I really appreciate your deep thinking here. Audience members, we do encourage you to participate in the chat or the Q&A feature if you do have questions for Mark and Michael. Mark, on that note of stewardship, this is just one note that I think about a lot in terms of continuity of governance. So the board's primary role is to ensure that the organization is led for the next generation, so to speak. But it kind of leads to a conundrum where there's a conservative ideology in that major changes aren't adapted. The board doesn't evolve very quickly. Could you speak a little bit about how that is? You're preserving the organization or the company for the next generation, but that makes it also difficult to change the way that the board operates.
Yeah, it's a classic tension. I think it was brought out very well in that brilliant book, which came out almost exactly the same year as the Tomorrow's Company report in the 1990s, Built to Last. They had a series of tensions, but that one of them was this is Jerry Porras and Jim Collins. Jim Collins went on to write Good to Great, but the first book they wrote together, I think is the best, and it was a study of what were the common features in the companies which had outperformed the stock market over 5 decades. And one of them was preserving the core while stimulating progress. It's that very thing you're talking about. Yeah, there's one thing to, keep the values, but don't insist on the practices, I suppose, is what we're talking about. I also think that, going back to this point about hybrid ownership, I think where you've got a listed company with a strong anchor shareholder, which may be, in the case I quoted of Bertelsmann or Tata, it may be of family origin, or it may be, in some cases, a form of employee ownership, like Unipart, a company that I much admired, as I said earlier. You then get this, I think you get some of this balance, because your newly arrived shareholders are bringing some of the impatience to the board, but they're not allowed to overwhelm that sort of protection of what we really value around here. So I think it's a tension to be managed. It's a tension that board composition should help to manage, that board diversity should help to manage, but it's a tension you've got to live.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that. And then, Michael, I'm kind of deeply interested, as we were discussing previous to the webinar start, the 22 factors that you mentioned. I think the arrival or the democratization of AI and a widespread uses here is a perfect example of how a business or an organization or a board has to address a challenge across a number of different facets or features. We all think of AI as, oh, you just type something in, you get a great answer. But the reality is, behind that, there are these massive data centers consuming massive amounts of energy. So there's an environmental factor. You talked about some of the human centered attributes that you measure as well. There's also, there's bias in AI. I'm just curious how you and your company are unpacking some of those things as businesses and organizations try to either adopt or just meet the challenge of AI and widespread usage.
Yeah, what we've seen over the years is that these issues wax and wane, and the exercise on indicating which are the priority issues for you we've done over many years, and we can see that some things heat up and some things lose their heat. Of the 22 issues, we have a number that we're quite excited or rather impatient to add back in. We looked at 50 or 60 different issues previously, and we've reduced them down as we've developed the second iteration of Responsible 122. It's just enough of in terms of variety, a bit of one-stop shop. We cover a wide range of different issues, but we would like to add new ones on. And I think under environment that you touched on, and the environmental impact of AI, we'd like to add air quality as a new issue that seems to be garnering a great deal of interest around the world. Not separate to greenhouse gas emissions. What is the quality of the air? Incredible numbers of premature deaths reported from poor air quality in the UK, as well as sort of poorer parts of the world. We have been looking at Gaza, and we have been looking at the role of business in promoting peace as an issue. And we've been involved with others writing a letter from UK business to the UK government to demand some action, intervention, some change, stop this genocide, stop these war crimes from happening. It's taken us several weeks to write this with a number of volunteers, and it's just about to be published. But it's opened up this whole exploration of, is this a legitimate responsibility issue for us to add onto our list? I think promoting peace will be added onto our list. I think it is possible to be poor, okay, good, and excellent at promoting peace. And I'm really interested to add that benchmark in and to work with some of the peace campaigners to try and, as I say, loosely define poor, okay, good, and excellent, and create those disclosure prompts. So as a business or any type of organization, your priority is to get the product and service out the door at the right price and quality. You have to do that. You have to compete. You have to do that well enough today, tomorrow, into the future. And we've realized over the years that there's a certain amount of time and resource and bandwidth that you can invest in good governance and good stewardship and good responsibility and sustainability practice. And whether that's 1% or 2% or 5%, we believe that businesses should invest that resource such that they're improving their responsibility performance to improve their business. That's the balance you have to achieve. If you're going to invest 10 or 20% of resources into this agenda, you simply are going to fail to be a going concern in future quarters. Your products and services will become too expensive. This has to really work with your competing business objectives. So it may be that there is an opportunity for some of the participants on the call to talk about the extent to which they're involved in promoting peace or responsible technology or good governance. But we don't want to put too great a burden on businesses or too little a burden on business. It's just about getting it just right, the sort of Goldilocks test, just the right amount of resource invested here. And you're not going to be good or excellent at all 22 issues at once. You have to, as I said, prioritize. You have to trade off and find those issues where you have the most to gain by improving your performance as a business or an organization. So that's how we work.
Yeah. And then just practically, I'm sure the number is slightly different in the UK, but here in North America, average board size 12 to 14 directors. Let's imagine a scenario where you as an individual director or non-executive director, so to speak, are bought into this prioritizing, ESG, prioritizing good social ethical governance. How do you bring that to the board and introduce that as a topic? How do you convince those 11, 13 other board members that this is an important priority for the board and the organization itself?
Is that to me?
Sorry, I should have addressed you.
Is that to me or to Mark? Sorry.
I'll go with Mark. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I think how do you get the board's attention for these issues? Several things. First of all, I think there's a question of board composition. If you've got your board well composed, you don't have to raise them because you've got a board where there's enough people with their antennae out there that they know that there's an increasing focus on, take Michael's example, air quality, and somebody on the board will be raising it, or indeed, if the board has a good advisory board, and I've sat on a few of those on corporate responsibility, they will be raising. That's the first point. The second point I'd raise is, of course, about risk. If you're doing your risk analysis well, and tomorrow's company is same series we produced the board mandate thing, we did something on the governance of risk. If you're doing your risk management well, then these issues are going to come up, because what we found over the 20 years we were developing this series of handbooks or toolkits was your relationships are your antennae. Your early warning signs of trouble are very often you're having embedded relationships with NGOs, with communities, with neighborhoods. That's where you're smelling the risk long before it becomes something which you feel you ought to do something about. There are very few issues, I would suggest, on the Responsible 100's 22, which you can simply say are, oh, you have to do this if you have a conscience. Of course, having a conscience should get your focus on them, but nearly all of those issues in the end materialize as risk, either directly, physically on the business, financially on the business, or reputationally and brand-wise.
Yeah, and I recall that relationship factor is so important because we know internal data shows us that the average director is serving on 2.8 boards, and those are a mix of corporate or capitalist boards and nonprofit boards, maybe higher education institutions. So having that domain knowledge in kind of overlapping board-led organizations, I think, is really important.
Can I just add one thing there, that Josh, if you've got time,
Yeah.
just very, very quickly, there's a danger of a clubbiness among the recruitment of board directors. I think that I hear too many board directors sort of talking about the directorships they've assembled as if they were, I don't know, club memberships, as opposed to having that diverse group of people who are really, some of them are going to be passionate about things that are very specific to that business. And when we saw Apple go badly wrong, it was when they lost somebody like Steve Jobs, who had that passion for what made Apple unique. You want directors who've got that spark, not necessarily directors who just think you're quite a convenient addition to their portfolio.
Absolutely. And I was thinking of that factor as well when you mentioned the family-owned organizations outperforming the others, is that maybe there is an element of a board composition that includes people with less tenure or people with less professional experience, but a different point of view.
Yeah. And families often put the young generation on the board with that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, Michael and Mark, just 5 minutes remaining. I want to thank you for coming today, sharing, contributing your point of view. If there are any additional questions from the audience, it looks like we've addressed everything that we have. So I guess I'll leave off with you, Michael, if you have any closing remarks as we come to the end of the presentation here.
Yeah, I think I just like to sort of add a few things on that last question in terms of proselytizing on the board and converting the other board members that are less concerned about good governance or good sustainability or good forward thinking, was to repeat what I said about making it about business success. I'm fully aligned with the fiduciary duty, and I think that extends to the programs we should get involved in. I'm sad that 52 out of the FTSE 100 are removing the words DEI or the acronyms DEI and the words net zero from their reports. That's depressing for me. I know a lot of them are continuing to doing what they're doing before, but not using those acronyms. I think it's about doing the responsibility things that we can do that make us a better business and make us a more profitable business and improve our culture, and make us more attractive, especially to younger generations, and make it such that we're more innovative and creative, and use all those sort of good businessy things to succeed as a company. But when we're choosing the social, environmental, and ethical issues that are relevant to us, where we can positively impact more, where we can reduce our negative impact on people and planet, if you can persuade board members that this is the game, then I think you're here for the long term. And if you can't persuade them this is the game, I think that you've got problems, because that's how we see this playing out in the future. Responsibility, sustainability, and good governance as competitive advantage.
Yeah, and I like that idea too of these are challenges, but if you can rise and meet the expectation of these challenges, you're a more agile and effective board or an organization that can kind of thread the needle more accurately than another board that may neglect to rise to that challenge. Mark, any concluding remarks from you as we wrap up?
Yes, I think the role of societal awareness as a source of real innovation is very important. I think that's what comes out of what Michael has just been saying. Two things. One is the shortest definition I ever came up with of good corporate governance is in 2 words. It's hindsight now. And the other thing I think today's discussion confirms is the soft things are always the hardest things, but just because they're the soft things, don't think you're being hard by ignoring them. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share our thinking.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Michael. I think we have one more quick poll question. Darren, on our webinar backend, there we go. Just a quick, how did we do? Did you like the quality of the content today? And then if you are interested in learning more about Onboard, please do answer our poll. But audience members, thank you so much for joining us today. I think this has been a very enlightening and lively discussion. Mark and Michael, really appreciate your contributions and your points of view. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, good afternoon, and
Thank you.
hopefully we'll see you tomorrow on our next presentation. Thank you.
I've gone. It's gone. Was it a good or a bad?